The forest that never let go. The forest of Varelli's Nine was not a normal forest. It breathed, it moved, it hunted. Thick green vines curled around trees like snakes ready to strike. The air was heavy with fog and sweet rot. Somewhere deep inside this forest, a girl was trapped. Her silver skin glowed under the moonlight as she struggled to scream. But the vines were wrapped around her mouth and legs and arms. Her eyes were wide with fear. She was not human. Her name was Elira. She had come with her team from the skies. Explorers, scientists, soldiers. But when the storm hit and the jungle attacked, they left. They ran. She was too slow. The vines found her. They liked her. They held her tightly. They did not kill her. They just kept her alive and trapped. Like a flower in a glass cage. Hours passed. Maybe days. She could not tell. The vines would not let her sleep. She cried in silence, her voice lost in the thick green fog, but then something changed. Footsteps. Not the soft crawl of vines or the whisper of leaves. These were boots, heavy, fast, careful. Mark was a human scout, one of the few allowed to patrol the edge of this deadly forest. He did not trust it. No one did. But he had a mission. A signal had come in. A weak beacon. Faint. Almost gone. His scanner beeped once. Then again, he moved deeper. Every step was slow. The trees seemed to bend toward him. The vines twitched. He felt like he was being watched. But he was used to danger. He had survived worse, or so he thought. Then he heard it a sound. Soft, like a whisper through water. A voice. Not loud, but filled with pain. He stopped, turned his head. He heard it again. Help. He drew his blade and moved toward the sound. His visor scanned the area. Life sign. Detected. Weak. Humanoid. Not human. He pushed through the last wall of vines and saw her Elira, wrapped in green vines like a broken doll. Her eyes looked at him. Not with fear, but hope. She was still alive. Still fighting. Mark stepped forward. The vines moved. They did not like him. He raised his cutter and sliced one vine. It screamed. A high-pitched screech filled the forest. The other vines moved quickly, like angry snakes. One hit his arm. Another tried to wrap around his neck. He fought them, cutting left and right. Elira's eyes followed him. Her lips moved. She was trying to speak, but the vines held her mouth too tight. Mark reached her, grabbed her waist, pulled hard. The vines tried to stop him. They wrapped around his legs, his chest, his blade hand. He dropped the cutter, used both arms, and ripped the vines apart. His armor sparked, his skin burned, but he did not stop. And then finally, she fell into his arms, light, cold, weak. He held her, breathing hard. The vines hissed, but they backed away. For now, Elira looked up at him. Her voice was like wind through leaves. You... Human. Mark smiled. Yeah, human. And you owe me a story. She tried to sit up, but failed. He placed her gently on the ground, gave her water. She drank slowly, her hands shaking. The forest behind them pulsed. The vines moved again. Searching, Mark stood guard, his weapon ready. Elira touched his arm. They will come back, she said softly. He nodded. Let them come. But in his heart, he knew. This forest was not done. It had let her go, but it would not forget, and neither would he. She wasn't just a girl. Elira lay on the ground, breathing slowly. Her skin shimmered faintly under the green light that filtered through the twisted canopy above. Mark crouched beside her, watching the jungle for movement. The vines were quiet. For now, but he could feel it. The silence wasn't peace. It was waiting. He looked at her again. She didn't look like a soldier. Her arms were thin. Her eyes were too big. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. "Why did you help me?" Mark didn't answer right away. He was still focused on the trees. Every shadow looked like a trap. Every rustle felt like a warning. But her question hung in the air. He finally spoke, because no one else did. Elira stared at him. She blinked slowly, like she didn't understand. But maybe she did. Her people had left her. They didn't fight for her, but this human did. Mark helped her sit up. She winced. The vines had cut deep into her arms and legs. Tiny thorns still stuck in her skin. He took out a small tool and gently removed them. She hissed in pain but didn't pull away. "You're not just some explorer, are you?" he asked. She looked down. "I was chosen for what? To die." Mark froze. Elira continued. "My people. The forest demands a gift. A girl. Every 10 years. I was that girl. They brought me here, told me it was for the greater good, that the jungle would spare the rest if it took me." He stared at her. Anger rose in his chest. "They left you to die, and they just flew away." She nodded, "And the forest accepted me. The vines came alive and wrapped around me like I belonged to them. I became part of the offering." Mark stood up. He walked a few steps away. He hated this kind of logic. Sacrifice one to save many. He'd seen it before. On other worlds. In old wars. And it always left one person. Broken. Alone. He turned back to her. "You're not just a girl, Elira. You're someone who didn't deserve this." She looked up at him. "No one ever said that to me before." He knelt beside her again, took out a warming patch and placed it gently on her chest. Her breathing eased. "I don't leave people behind," Mark said. The jungle rustled again. Fast, too fast. Mark grabbed his weapon and scanned the area. Vines were moving, but not toward them. They were retreating. "Why are they pulling back?" He whispered. Elira's voice was tight. "Because something worse is coming." They heard it then. Heavy thuds, not footsteps. Thuds, like roots slamming into the ground. The trees shook. Dust fell from the leaves. "What is that?" Mark asked. "The guardian." She whispered. Mark's blood went cold. They send it when the vines fail. When the sacrifice tries to escape. Mark grabbed Elira's hand and helped her up. She couldn't stand properly. He picked her up and ran. Branches tore at his armor. Sharp leaves sliced his face, but he didn't stop. Behind them, the guardian moved through the forest. A huge shape. All vines and bark and bone. Its body made of living wood. Its face was empty, but somehow still angry. Elira looked back and gasped. "It's faster now." "It's angry." "You cut the vines." Mark kept running. He found a broken hill, a shallow cave hidden by roots. He slid inside and placed Elira down, covered the entrance with leaves, held his breath. The forest went silent again, then the heavy thuds passed. The guardian didn't find them, not yet. Elira leaned against the wall, her eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand, human. This forest doesn't just want blood. It wants memory. It wants pain. It feeds on it." Mark didn't know what to say. Elira whispered. "It will come again. It always does." He sat beside her. Pulled out a flare. "Just in case, then we fight. Together." She looked at him again. Her voice shaking. "Why are you still here?" Mark looked at her, his voice steady. "Because I heard you cry and no one else listened." Outside, the vines began to move again, and the forest remembered his face. Hunted through the trees. Mark held his breath as the last vine slid away from the cave entrance. For a few heartbeats, nothing moved. Then the sounds of the jungle returned. Low buzzing, distant chirps, the soft rustle of shifting leaves. But something was wrong. The noises didn't feel natural. They felt staged. Like the jungle was pretending to be calm. Elira leaned back against the cave wall. Her silver skin had lost its glow. Her breath was shallow. She was trying to hide it, but Mark could see the pain in her eyes. The vines had cut deep, and she hadn't fully recovered from their grip. "You need rest," he said quietly. She gave a weak smile. "This jungle doesn't let you rest." He looked out again. He didn't like hiding. He was trained to move, to fight, to outthink the enemy. But here, the enemy wasn't a soldier or a beast. It was the forest itself, alive, listening, planning. "We can't stay here long," he said. "It already knows where we are." She closed her eyes. "Then we run." Mark nodded. He helped her to her feet again. This time she stood better. Her legs were shaking, but her spirit was stronger than before. The fear was still there, but now it shared space with something else. Anger. They moved through the trees slowly at first. Mark led, cutting through hanging moss and low vines with his blade. Elira followed close, her hand gripping his backpack. Every so often, the trees shifted. Their branches arched unnaturally, like arms trying to catch them. "Don't touch the flowers," she warned as they passed a patch of glowing blue buds. "Why, they release spores that paralyze your lungs." He nodded and guided her around them. They moved like that for almost 20 minutes. But then, Mark stopped tracks, not animal. Not vine, something else had passed this way recently. Large feet, deep imprints. Branches snapped overhead. He motioned for Elira to stay low. She crouched behind a rock, her breathing tight. Suddenly, a shadow moved. Mark turned just in time to see something leap down from the trees. It wasn't made of vines. It had skin. It was alien, but it was covered in jungle growth, moss on its back, thorns in its arms, bark across its face like armor. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow. It looked at Mark and gave a low growl. "It used to be one of us," Elira whispered from behind the rock. Mark didn't wait. He fired once. The blast hit the creature in the chest. It flew back, crashing into a tree. But it stood again. No scream, no sound, just rage. Mark grabbed Elira and ran. They were deeper in the jungle now. No paths, no light, just twisted trees and thick air. The creature followed, jumping between branches like it belonged to the forest. "They're called the Taken," she said as they ran. "People who didn't die when the forest caught them. It twisted them, used them." Mark slid down a muddy slope. Elira fell beside him. The Taken creature landed at the top and screamed, a high-pitched wail that shook the leaves. More sounds answered. 3 more screams from different directions. They were being hunted. Mark pulled Elira behind a broken tree trunk. He checked his blaster. "Low charge. How do we kill them?" "We don't. We distract them." She pulled a small device from her belt. Barely working. "This was part of my gear before the vines got me. It can send out a pulse. Maybe enough to confuse them for a while." "Maybe?" he asked. "Better than nothing." She pressed it. A pulse burst through the air. The Taken screamed again and stumbled. The trees around them shivered. Some vines pulled back. Mark used the moment. He lifted Elira and ran again. They reached an old wreck, metal torn by roots and rust. It used to be a dropship. Now it was just bones. But bones could still shelter. They climbed inside, closed a broken hatch, held their breath. Minutes passed. No sound. Maybe the pulse worked. Elira sat down, exhausted. Her body trembled, but her eyes stayed on Mark. "You could have left me, but you didn't." Mark sat beside her. "You're not something to leave behind." She smiled. "Most people wouldn't say that to a girl chosen as a sacrifice." "Then most people are fools." Outside, the jungle hissed softly. The Taken still searched. The forest still watched. But inside the wreck, for one short moment, two hearts beat freely, and one broken girl started to believe she wasn't just something the forest forgot. She was someone a human fought to keep alive. The creatures of the green silence. Inside, the wreckage of the old dropship, Elira curled up near the wall while Mark stood watch by the broken hatch. The place smelled of rust and old smoke, but it was safe. For now. Outside, the jungle whispered. The trees shifted, but not loudly. The Taken had stopped hunting. That was the part Mark didn't like. Why are they quiet now? Elira opened her eyes and looked at him. Because they're waiting. Mark turned back to the entrance. Waiting for what? For the silence to scare us. He didn't understand at first, but as the minutes passed, he felt it. The silence was heavy, like a weight on his chest. No bugs, no birds, no wind, just quiet. Deep, strange quiet. It wasn't normal. It was alive. The jungle's watching again, he muttered. No, Elira whispered. Its listening. Mark didn't move. He knew when an enemy was using fear as a weapon. And this jungle. It didn't just use vines or beasts or the Taken. It used stillness. It made you doubt the safety of silence. He motioned for Elira to stay back. Slowly, he opened the hatch. His blaster ready, he stepped outside. The air was thick and damp. The leaves barely moved. The vines hung like sleeping snakes. But something had changed. The ground was wet. Not with water, with sap, golden. Sticky. Fresh. He touched it with his boot. It clung. Heavy. Alive. He looked around. The jungle was growing fast. Too fast. Roots stretched where none were before. Trees that had been short now bent overhead. The forest was rebuilding itself, like it had a mind of its own. Then he saw them, eyes dozens, hidden in the trees watching, not Taken, not beasts. These were different, tall, thin. Their skin looked like stretched leaves and old bark. Faces hidden under masks, shaped like screaming mouths, long fingers dripping with green light. They didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. Elira stepped behind him, her voice small. The green silence. What? That's what they're called. My people didn't believe they were real. But I've heard stories. Beings made from the oldest part of the jungle. Not alive. Not dead. They come when the sacrifice fights back. Mark raised his weapon. They didn't move. He lowered it. Still nothing. He stepped forward. The closest one turned its head. That was all it took. Suddenly the air turned cold. The trees shook. And the silence broke. Like glass, a sound burst into the clearing. Low and deep. A vibration through the earth. Mark dropped to one knee. Elira held her ears. It wasn't just noise. It was thought. A message. Give her back. Mark's heart pounded. He shouted. You want her. You had your chance. You took her and tried to erase her. Another wave of sound hit them. She belongs here. Mark stood his ground. Not anymore. The green silence moved. Not walked. Not jumped. Just appeared closer. One step. Then two. Their arms reached out. Not with claws. But with vines of light. Elira screamed. Don't let them touch me. If they do, I won't be me anymore. Mark fired. The shot passed through one creature, but it didn't vanish. It just reformed. They're not solid. Elira cried. Then how do we stop them? You looked at her hands with memory. Mark was confused. The forest feeds on pain, on fear. But it fears something too. It fears joy. It fears things that don't belong to it. She took a deep breath and grabbed his hand. Close your eyes. Think of something real. Something happy. Something this jungle can't take. He hesitated. Do it. Hadida Lake on Earth. His sister laughing in the water. Cold soda in summer. Sunlight on metal. His dog barking at butterflies. His mother's voice telling him to come inside. The jungle screamed. The green silence shrieked. Their forms broke apart like smoke and wind. The trees pulled back. The vines withered. Elira was glowing again. Faint, but steady, it worked. Mark pulled her close and ran. The jungle fought them. Branches slashing, roots rising. But it couldn't grab them. They broke out of the tree line and found high ground. A cliff that looked down on the endless green. They stopped. Breathed. Elira fell to her knees. They'll come. Again. The jungle always wants its sacrifice. Mark sat beside her. Then next time, we make it bleed. And for the first time, the jungle hesitated because the girl it once owned had remembered herself and the human beside her refused to let her go. Her tribe left. Her behind Elira sat on the cliff's edge, her legs pulled up to her chest, her silver skin glowing softly under the setting twin suns. The jungle stretched below them like a sea of green teeth. Silent, watching, waiting. But, for the first time since her capture, Elira didn't feel like prey. Mark crouched beside her, checking the charge on his blaster and adjusting the cracked plating on his left shoulder. One of the green silence had nearly crushed it earlier. He didn't care. His eyes were on Elira. You okay? She nodded, but her voice was quiet. Do you want to know the truth about why I was left? He didn't answer, but she kept going. My tribe believed in balance. That peace with the jungle required a gift. A sacred offering. Every 10 cycles, they would draw lots. I wasn't supposed to be chosen. The elders had already picked another. But her family had influence. Mine didn't. Mark's grip on his weapon tightened. They picked you because you were easier to lose. She looked at him. Because I was quiet. Because I was different. Because I asked questions. Mark looked away. That's not a reason to leave someone to die. To them it was. I was a small price for 10 years of safety. Mark stood and paced near the edge. That's not safety. That's fear wearing a smile. Elira's eyes followed him. They told me the vines would make it painless. That I'd be asleep before I even knew. But it wasn't like that. No. The vines wanted me alive. They liked my fear. My pain. They held me awake, made me feel every moment. Every whisper of wind felt like goodbye. Mark didn't speak. He just listened, and when I cried for help, I didn't expect anyone to hear. But I did. He said quietly. She smiled. Just a little. Yes. You did. He sat beside her again. And I'll keep hearing you. Until you're loud enough to make them regret forgetting you. She looked down at the jungle. You don't understand what it means to be unwanted by your own kind. Mark glanced at her. You're wrong. I do. She blinked. What Earth's no paradise? I was a war orphan, raised in state housing, grew up fighting for scraps, for attention, for a reason to matter. I joined the service just to get away from the silence of being invisible. He stared into the trees below. So when I saw you wrapped in those vines, helpless, forgotten, I saw myself. Elira's throat tightened. You saw yourself in me. Yeah. And I decided this time, silence doesn't win. A pause stretched between them. Mark. Yeah, would you have come for me if I wasn't beautiful? He turned to her sharply. I didn't even know what you looked like under those vines. All I saw was someone who needed help. That's enough. She looked at him with something different in her eyes now. Not just gratitude. Something deeper. Thank you. Suddenly the ground shook slightly under them. A soft rumble, like a breath from the jungle itself. Mark stood, eyes scanning, Saw the trees. They're getting ready for something. Elira nodded slowly. The jungle's not done. The last line of defense hasn't come yet. What is it? The root mind. The heart of the forest. It's buried deep under the earth, feeding everything. It doesn't move. It thinks. It commands. So it's the real reason this forest feels alive. Yes, and it knows you're a threat now. Mark smirked good. Maybe it's time someone scared it back. She hesitated. You can't go there alone. The root mind is protected. Only those with marked DNA from my tribe can enter without being attacked instantly. So we go together. She looked down. You'd really risk your life again for me. He placed a hand on her shoulder. You're not just a sacrifice, Elira. You're someone worth saving. Again and again. She swallowed hard. Then I'll take you there. I'll help you find the root mind. But if we do this, we can't turn back, we won't. They stood together, side by side, staring down into the jungle. For the first time, Elira wasn't afraid to return because this time she wasn't going back as a gift. She was going back as a storm, and the forest had no idea what was coming. Burn the roots. Break the curse. The jungle didn't scream when they returned. It waited, watched, as if surprised Elira had come back, not in chains of vines, but walking free beside the human who defied it. Elira led the way, her steps steady despite the trembling deep in her chest. The forest had once wrapped around, her body like a coffin. Now, its vines shifted uneasily with every footstep she took. She wasn't alone anymore, and the jungle felt that change. Mark followed close behind, blaster in one hand, flare in the other. He'd burned through alien swamps, fought off raiders, and faced death more than once. But this place made his skin crawl. It was too quiet. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. How close are we? He asked in a low voice. Elira's eyes glowed faintly as she looked toward a wide root twisting into the earth like a claw. Very. The root mind is beneath that tree. They stood before it, a massive blackened trunk with thick vines running like veins down its side. A single opening gaped in the center, pulsing slowly like a living throat. Warm breath flowed from it, thick with spores and memory. You ready? She asked. Mark glanced at her. You sure you are? She nodded. This forest fed on her fear once, not anymore. They stepped inside. Instantly, the light changed. The air was wet, thick with whispers. Mark could hear them. Voices not in words, but in feelings. Grief, regret, rage. The walls pulsed with memory. Branches formed tunnels. Faces blinked out from the wood itself. Brief images of others who'd been taken. Some still screamed. Some just wept. Elira touched one wall gently. Her hand glowed. They're trapped here. The old sacrifices. Their minds, not their bodies. That's how the jungle remembers. And that's how it feeds. Mark said through clenched teeth. They moved deeper. Roots grew thicker, layered like armor. The path narrowed, then widened again, into a massive chamber. At the center pulsed a heart-shaped root structure, taller than both of them. It glowed red and green, slow and sick. From it, thick tendrils spread out across the floor like a spider's web. Vines twitched as the root mind became aware of them. Elira stared. Her voice was barely a whisper. It's aware of everything, every step, every breath, every memory I ever had. Mark stepped forward. Then, let's remind it who you are now. He raised a thermal charge from his belt, placed it near the base of the core. The vines didn't move yet. They were confused, curious. This hadn't happened before. Mark set the timer 1 minute. But just as he turned to Elira, the floor came alive. Tendrils lashed out, grabbing his leg, pulling him down. A spiked vine shot at his throat. He rolled, slashed with his blade, cut through 2, but 3 more grabbed him. He shouted. Elira stepped forward. The vines hesitated. She held out both arms. Stop! The vines paused, wrapping around her instead. You want me? She shouted. Then take me. But know this. She closed her eyes, pulled from her memory. Not pain, but warmth. A child's song. The taste of fruit on a hot day. The laughter of someone she once loved. And now, Mark's voice when he said, "You're not something to leave behind." The room screamed. The root mind pulsed violently. The vine shuddered, retracted, flailed. They hated it. This wasn't the fear they craved. This was joy. This was freedom. Mark broke free, slammed the final switch on the thermal charge. Time's up. He grabbed Elira's hand and ran. Behind them, the chamber cracked. Fire roared from the ground. The root mind wailed, not like an explosion, but like something dying. The tunnel began to collapse. They sprinted. The vines tried to grab them, but they were weak now. Slow, the fire was chasing them, burning the memories, breaking the grip of the forest. They leapt through the mouth of the tree as it exploded behind them, green light and ash shooting into the sky. Silence followed. Real silence. Not the forest's breath-holding. Silence. This was peace. Mark rolled over, coughing. Elira was beside him, smiling through tears. It's done. He sat up, covered in soot and glowing sap. You did it. No, we did it. The jungle was still now. The trees didn't move. The vines had gone limp. The air was warm and clean. Elira looked up. For the first time in her life, the forest didn't look like a prison. It looked like home, not for what it had taken, but for what she'd taken back. To freedom and a new bond. Ash still floated in the air like quiet snow, falling on broken roots and blackened leaves. The jungle no longer hissed. The vines no longer moved. And the great tree, the one that had pulsed with the root mind's curse, now stood cracked and silent, hollow like a broken bone. Elira stood barefoot on the soft earth, looking around as if seeing the world for the first time. The color of the jungle had changed. The deep green had softened. The glow in the trees now gentle, not watching. The shadows no longer hid monsters. The silence felt peaceful. Mark stepped up beside her, wiping ash off his shoulder armor. His blaster was nearly drained, and his armor was full of cuts, but his eyes were calm. He looked at her, not like someone who had saved a girl, but like someone who now stood beside an equal. You're free now. Elira turned her head slowly. It doesn't feel real. It is. You did it. You broke it. She knelt and touched the ground. For years, this soil had held screams, blood, memory. Now it only held quiet. She could breathe. Her chest no longer felt tight. I thought I would die here. She whispered. I thought no one would even remember my name. Mark looked toward the tree line where sunlight was now breaking through untouched for the first time in decades. Well now, you'll be the one everyone remembers. She smiled. It was small and full of sadness, but also something else, hope. They walked through the forest slowly. The path seemed to open ahead of them, the plants parting gently, not out of fear, just respect. The forest had been reset, not dead, just cleansed after some time. They came across the remains of Elira's old landing pod. Twisted metal, cracked screens. Moss had begun to grow over it, but it was still there, like a forgotten grave. She stopped in front of it. They left me here. Mark. Just like that. One order, one ritual. I was just a name on a list. He placed a hand on her shoulder. They don't get to define you anymore. She turned. Then who does you do? Starting now. Elira nodded slowly. She reached inside the pod and pulled out something. An old tribe emblem, cracked in half. She stared at it for a long time before tossing it into the trees. Goodmark smiled, you sure? Yeah, that wasn't family. That was fear with a mask. On, they left the wreck behind. As they neared the edge of the jungle, a soft hum filled the air. Several human scouts stood waiting. Their transports had landed outside the forest after the signal flare triggered. No one had dared enter the jungle. Until now, one of the officers stepped forward. Confused. Is that her? Mark nodded. Yeah. The one your sensors picked up. She's not a target. She's not an experiment. She's not property. He looked the man straight in the eye. She's with me. The officer hesitated, then gave a short nod. Orders were orders, but this was different. The forest behind them spoke of something far older than science or rank. As they boarded the transport, Elira looked back one last time. Do you think it'll stay quiet now? Mark thought for a moment. I think it'll remember what happened. I think it'll remember you. She gave a soft laugh. Then maybe that's enough. They sat side by side as the transport lifted into the sky. The jungle grew smaller beneath them. What had once looked like a trap now looked like just another part of the world. Healed and resting. You still haven't told me your full name, she said suddenly. Mark smirked. It's not that impressive. I'd like to decide that. Mark looked at her. Mark Holden. Earthborn. Mechanic. Soldier. Occasional hero. She laughed, a real laugh this time. And I'm Elira Voss. Once a sacrifice, now something else entirely. What are you now? She looked at him, then reached out and gently took his hand free. And maybe yours, if you'll have me. He blinked. Not out of surprise, but out of how natural it felt to hear those words. Then I guess we're both free together. And as the transport carried them toward a new future, the jungle behind them whispered not with hunger, but with peace. Because the girl once wrapped in vines had been saved, not just by a human's hand, but by a bond no forest could ever take back again.